You know, the maybe the criticism that I'd like to hear you address is status, right? Status is deeply important to human beings. I have a close friend named Eric Ward who says if you have an org chart, and it doesn't matter how thin you draw the line between two people, as soon as you draw a line, somebody's going to try and figure out who's in charge of the other one. And it's just a natural human reaction. What do you think about that? You don't?
It's not. It is not. If we look back at the foragers, the hunter-gatherers, which constitutes 190,000 of our 200,000 years on Earth, they did not organize themselves hierarchically or in status relationships. In fact, they went to great lengths to defeat anyone who tried to play that game on them. In fact, one of the greatest books of anthropology that I know is called Hierarchy in the Forest by Chris Boehm. It actually should have been called Anti-Hierarchy in the Forest, but he called it, for whatever reason, Hierarchy in the Forest. And he explains how forager people, despite the fact that our near relatives, the chimpanzees, are very hierarchical, we managed to get out of that box. And we would not tolerate hierarchy. And in fact, anyone who tried to pull that game would be first laughed at and then ignored and then exiled. And if they kept coming back trying to say, I'm the boss, they'd be killed. And the enabling technology was unlike chimps, where the biggest, baddest chimp was really pretty hard to deal with. Humans had weapons. And so even a random dude could kill the biggest, baddest dude in the band. And humans built this anti-hierarchical way of life that lasted for 95% of our time on Earth. And we believe, this is a core idea of GameB, that we can get back to that. As an example, you do need leadership. But how did the foragers do it? They and some indigenous peoples today, not all, they use what's called role-based leadership rather than position-based leadership. So the guy who was best at, hunting buffalo would go out and lead the band that was hunting buffalo, but that was his only authority, was to lead people on buffalo hunts. And when they were back in the camp, he wasn't the chief. Nobody gave him any extra respect. Mary, who was the greatest berry picker, she led people on berry picking expeditions. And oh, by the way, if some new up and comer turned out to be better at it, they took over as the role-based leader. And these things, or even the guy who was in charge of the buffalo hunt got tired of leading the buffalo hunt. Decides he wants to go start napping stones. He could just say, well, I'm not doing that anymore. So much, much, much more fluid and emergent. And the biggest challenge of GameB is to be able to do that as well and better than Game A does it. And we believe that we will have a huge competitive advantage. Because what would you rather work in? A world where we're all collaborating together as peers in rotating role-based leadership, or one of these god-awful command and control structures? We believe that over time, we will pull the talent out of Game A because it will prefer the Game B way of organizing work. And so our ability to parasitize Game A just gets stronger and stronger over time. We pull out the talent, leave the stiffs there. They're less effective structures or more effective structures. Looks like we're going to win. That's our theory.
Well, there's no doubt, like the modern corporation today, if you go look at their hierarchical structure, it is exactly the same as it was in the 1930s, maybe even the 1890s. Whatever structure they had, where there's a guy on top and then they have three people to report to them and on up. I personally would love the system that you're talking about, but I have strong doubts about how that happens. So it's very interesting to hear you talk about.
It's time for us to put our words to action, because Proto-Bees, which is on the ground communities, will happen this year. The other ones that will happen this year are GameB Ventures. We will be starting up some businesses on these principles, and maybe we're wrong, but maybe we're right. And we'll soon find out.
Yeah, I think some of the coolest companies that are out there right now, the guy I mentioned before, his name's Eric Ward. He's with a company called Ag Biome, and they don't do raises or they do raises, but they don't do promotions in the same way. So in their company, if you want to get a career milestone, they call it, you actually have to advocate for yourself. You have to say, hey, I think that 2 years ago I was doing this work. Now I'm doing this work. I want to find an advocate and 4 people that I'm going to go ask for their feedback. Do you think I've been moving forward? What is your direct feedback? And then after you get those 4 people's feedback, you take it to a committee that's made up of the larger organization, and they make the case for you. How are you doing? Are you moving up? And they give you really concrete feedback as to whether or not you've achieved it or not. And so they don't have this, well, I moved up. I went from scientist 1 to now I'm scientist 3, and I'm really excited about continuing to get to scientist 4. And instead, they're able to collaborate. And what that allows is exactly like you were saying, within their company, they're allowed to choose which projects they work on, which means they actually have way more fun and way more interest and get up every day a lot more excited about it. I would never have crossed my mind unless we were talking that you could do that on a larger scale than just that one company. It genuinely wouldn't have crossed my mind.
They're not the only company that does that. A company called Valve does that. They're the ones who run the Steam online game system. Zappos does a variant on that called Holacracy. It's another example. And there are others. And it's growing. And as you say, it ought to work better, and it's certainly, and most importantly, in the transition period, it ought to attract the most talented people. Because what would you rather be, in that kind of company, or grinding your way up the hierarchy? And I can tell you, even though I rose to the top of the hierarchy, most of the people who rose to the top of the hierarchy didn't do through talent; they did through backstabbing and politics. And being in a big corporation most of the time is not a very pleasant way to spend 8 to 10 hours a day. And that, again, just like the Soviet Union collapsed when the people could see on TV what it was like in the West, when people can see what it's like to organize work and production and life without command and control, without hierarchy, and without status through possessions, at least heavy emphasis on status through possessions, I think people are going to vote with their feet.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.